Hello people, today we're going to be presenting on radio waves.
Yep, radio waves are a form of electromagnetic waves that are used in your everyday lives, whether it's your TV or your cell phone. This form of communication is by radio waves because, radio waves technically depend on sound waves and other vibrations to get to the one place to another, which is how you can text on your cell phone and the message immediately gets sent to your friend.
Alright guys, let's begin by talking about the sizes of these radio waves. These radio waves, according to our many sources such as the credible NASA and many other researchers, exist in many different sizes. For example, these radio waves can exist in the size of a coin or
Building!
yeah! Yo, Julia, please explain to us the similarities between radio waves and visible light.
Okay, the similarities between radio waves and visible light is they both travel at the speed of light and they're both electromagnetic radiation. Hey Jaideep, can you tell us the difference between radio waves and visible light?
Okay, so for the differences between radio waves and visible light, the radio waves are said to be 1 billion times longer than a visible light. Can you believe that? Whew. Anyways, the radio waves can actually not really be detected by the brain and are perceived as the size of a virus, whereas the visible light is divided into different colors and light spectrum. Alright, let's talk about the importance of these radio waves. These radio waves are useful in many circumstances, and because of their rather large size, they are used for communication from one area to another. Radio stations, news stations, and many other institutions use these radio waves as a way of encoding messages and transferring them wirelessly or through wire from one location to a farther away location. For example, these radios, which is basically the namesake of the radio waves, use these radio waves to transfer music from a location and play them into different locations, including many vehicles such as the cars or even your daily radio, news channels, etc.
Radio waves are pretty much used as a communication every day from one person to another or one place to another. They're used from phone to phone or from person to person, and the process, pretty much the overall product of the result is the communication, even if you're not close to your friend or the other person you're trying to communicate with.
Alright Julia, can you give us a little bit of an in-depth example and explanation of how these radio waves are used in communication?
Sure. Radio waves are pretty much transferred by if one person wants to send a message to another person. It's first traveled through binary, which is encoding the messages. It's different depending on the amplitude, frequency, and wavelength. So pretty much, as soon as you send out a message, it goes to the cell phone tower and then back to the person you're trying to communicate. This is all because of radio waves, because they convert it to the cell phone tower, then back to the person you're trying to communicate.
Thank you.
Hey Jaideep, why don't you tell us about superposition?
Alright, before we get to the next question about the FM and AM waves, let's discuss a little bit about superpositioning of waves. Superpositioning of waves occurs when two or more waves meet together and cross paths. When these waves cross paths, they form a larger piece of wave which basically encodes and carries the message and transfers it from one device to another device. Alright, Julia, can you now explain to us the difference between FM and AM waves?
Yep. So pretty much this all starts with a carrier wave where it converts from a wave to a sound. But if you were to get more specific, then it would become getting into FM and AM. First of all, FM is frequency, and pretty much that's how many times something occurs. So in this case, for a radio wave, that's how many times new information occurs throughout the conversation. While amplitude is the maximum something can reach. So in a radio wave, the maximum kind of depends on the frequency. It depends on the amount of information in the conversation. So that's how you decode and encode a message through carrier waves, through AM and FM, because that's how people communicate and get information from one side to another.
Alright guys, let's talk about the fundamental basics and the basic principles of communication. The communication as a whole is based upon energy transfer. In energy transfer, for example, if you're trying to communicate from a phone through an audio message,
The first primary step is for you to speak into the phone. By speaking into the phone, you're transferring energy signals from your phone into the phone, from your mouth into the phone, which then converts this into a radio wave through the use of electric fields and magnetic fields. And this radio wave is then transmitted to one cell phone tower, and then to another cell phone tower, and back into your other phone, and back as a sound wave. This basic transfer of energy defines the communication process and aids in communicating messages from one location to another location far away. Alright guys, now let's watch the energy story take place as me and Julia try to communicate using phones and radio. Go.
Hey, how are you doing? Yep, I'm doing great. Yep, that's okay. The wavelength, the frequency, and the speed. First of all, let's talk about the speed. Pretty much the speed of a sound wave is the speed of light, which is super fast, so that's why you can't really detect much with like the human eyes. But when we're talking about wavelength and frequency, the logic is pretty much the higher the frequency, the shorter the wavelengths of the sound wave. So that's like how they're related to each other.
Have you ever wondered how a sound wave is transmitted from one phone to another? And that too wirelessly? Well, the answer is simple, but though it's a little bit complex. At the beginning, a transmitter or a device encodes or confirms the message and puts it into a radio wave, which then uses the carrier wave and the superpositioning of waves to carry this message from one phone to the cell phone tower, from the tower to another tower, and the tower goes back into the phone and plays the message into the sound wave and into the person's ears. This process depends on the radio waves and the different sound waves to help carry the messages from one location to another and makes lives of humans very easy. Alright, Julia, can you explain to us the electromagnetic spectrum, please?
Sure. The electromagnetic spectrum is pretty much just, it ranges from, it's like a really wide category where radio waves are one of the electromagnetic waves inside the electromagnetic spectrum. So pretty much it's just a way to communicate with other people, whether it's through seeing or whether it's through sound waves. What's the difference between all technologies and how their waves behave? Well, in this topic, we'll use two examples. One is Wi-Fi and the other is 5G. First of all, let's start with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi requires, or let's just say depends on frequency because it needs it to get for the information through your device to the router so it can get to the other person. However, for 5G, it relates to waves because it requires more high radio wave frequencies, and because with the higher frequencies it will move at a faster speed and there will be less clutter in the air because it will travel through air. So with less clutter in the air, the information will be understood much more clearly. Okay, now how do antennas interact with each other? So pretty much the transmitter antenna, there's an electricity field inside, and the electricity field flows and vibrates, producing radio waves. These radio waves travel at the speed of light to the other antenna, which is also the receiving antenna. And the receiving antenna then uses to vibrate, and like the vibration inside to decode the message.
Alright guys, let's talk about the deeper physics behind the communication between cell phone tower 1 and cell phone tower 2. The cell phone tower 1 receives a message encoded by the binary system in a phone and the radio waves created by the magnetic and electric coils and the electric fields present between the phone and the tower. The tower then decodes this message to the reverse process of the magnetic and electric fields and converts it into a light transmittance. This light transmittance is then converted into another encoded message which then depends on a fiber optic cable that runs between cell phone tower 1 and cell phone tower 2. This fiber optic cable carries this light transmittance from the cell phone tower 1 and cell phone tower 2, and then helps in the process of decoding this message to the transmitter 2. This transmitter 2 then changes this message into another radio wave and sends it out to another phone, which then helps in the process of communication with the other person. Now let us watch a short video on how the cell phone tower 1 communicates with the cell phone tower 2.
Dance, boys. Dance. Do the